think it's good. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a este evento, un evento conjunto de Salud por Derecho y Health Action International. Un evento que busca un poco ir más allá en el debate sobre licenciamiento y acceso a medicamentos y vacunas desarrollados con apoyo público. El hecho de que dos organizaciones europeas están haciendo este evento, pero con una clara orientación hacia un público latinoamericano, marca, creo yo, un cambio en las dinámicas de discusión de este tipo de temas, en el sentido que conceptos de salud global son cada vez más discutidos en estos ámbitos de sur-sur, podríamos decir, ¿no? En este sentido, nosotros estamos muy interesados en recibir el feedback y, digamos, compartir las experiencias que vienen desde el continente americano. Vamos a estar hablando de dos informes. Un informe en castellano, que es la traducción de un informe que realizamos el Pacto Internacional del por Derecho justo hace un año, a la fecha, hace un año, sacábamos este informe y hoy estamos viendo su traducción al castellano y otro informe, en este caso por parte de Health Action International, que es una continuación del primero. Entonces, lo que estamos aquí viendo es una consistencia y sobre todo lo que queremos ver es cómo podemos utilizar estos informes en los procesos existentes, tanto a nivel de acuerdo pandémico como las discusiones en el marco de la Unión Europea, así como iniciativas nacionales en países como Chile o internacionales con organizaciones como DNDi. Y sin más, le cedo la palabra a Vanessa López, directora ejecutiva de Salud por Derecho. Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Jaume. I'm going to speak in Spanish as well. Bien, bueno, muchísimas gracias en primer lugar a todos los participantes, a todas las asistentes. Me han pedido dar una pequeña bienvenida a esta discusión online y también para recordar y enmarcarla en la asamblea de High EU Association Board que está teniendo lugar mañana aquí en Madrid. Y bueno, nos pareció una buena oportunidad para también poner en discusión otra vez esta versión de este informe en castellano y avanzar en las discusiones sobre las licencias y políticas de transferencia de tecnología. Simplemente, bueno, eso, comentar que mañana aparte de los temas más de la asociación, habrá unas discusiones públicas sobre el tema de producción pública, de local production y también del tratado pandémico. Y bueno, esta cuestión de la política de transferencia de tecnología es básica, ¿no? Y estamos viendo, sin embargo, que está quedando muy atrás en la agenda, por tanto es fundamental el empujar esta discusión y políticas tanto a nivel nacional, internacional y regional, como ha apuntado Jaume. Nada más, simplemente dar las gracias también muy especialmente a los ponentes que nos acompañan hoy, a Elena, a Gaspar, a Rachel y como no, también a Irene y a Jaume, que explicarán este informe. Y sin más, doy la palabra a Elena Villanueva, que es consultora en salud global y que va a moderar esta mesa, bueno, y además de amiga también, y que va a moderar esta mesa. Gracias.
Gracias, Vanessa. Gracias, Jaume. I'm going to be speaking in English, so good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have been invited to moderate this session. I'm seeing some questions in the chat regarding how to access the interpretation. So just maybe as a reminder, at the lower side of your computer, you may have a bar, and to the right side, you will see a button that says interpretation. And you can switch from English to Spanish there. And please keep indicating if you have challenges with that. And our colleagues might be able to help you with that. Because as my other colleagues are saying, we are going to be switching between both languages. So welcome to this session. I think it's going to be an interesting debate regarding discussion on licensing model for health technologies. It's not a new topic. But however, I think we have current debates happening nowadays in Geneva, in Brussels, and elsewhere that bring the topic back to the agenda and the importance and relevance of this topic for access to health technologies. And we want to share with you some experiences as the one of the NDI, but also the experience of the Universidad de Chile with the COVID Technology Access Pool, CTAP, that has been recently expanded to cover technologies beyond COVID. We will also hear from Irene and Jaume about opportunities to consider in licensing approaches in the current policy debates in Brussels and Geneva. So without further delay, as we don't have much time, let me give the floor to the speakers, to the panelists. And as a reminder to them, please stick to the 8 minutes time that we have appointed to you to debate. I will intervene if you don't, so because this is a very short program and we want to make sure we have time for questions. That probably is actually the most exciting part. And for those of you in the audience, feel free to leave your questions in the chat that we will compile and use during the time for questions, or you will be able to intervene after all our panelists have spoke. So first speaker is going to be Irene Bernal, which most of you might already know. She's an advocacy and research manager at the Spanish organization Salud por Derecho. Irene will be presenting the main findings of the report she has co-authored, Licencias y Acceso a Tecnologías de la Salud. Our colleagues are going to be putting the link to this report in the chat. And she will also present on a very interesting mechanism, the hospital exception, which is a mechanism to improve patient access to innovative therapies, and also another mechanism for local production. And she might be able to give us some details on how Spain has made use of this mechanism. So please, Irene, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elena. Well, this time I'm going to speak in Spanish. Voy a hablar en español, que además me gusta mucho, especialmente pues, favorecer el hablar en español y en catalán, si puede ser también, en este tipo de eventos. Así que muchísimas gracias. Muchísimas gracias a Jai y a todos los colegas por haber continuado con este proceso que empezamos el año pasado. Bueno, el año pasado o el anterior, la verdad, hace ya un par de años. Un poco con la intención de profundizar un poco más en por qué, o cuáles eran las razones que estaban detrás de no licenciar la innovación biomédica de una manera mucho más amplia, mucho más exclusiva. Pues, en este caso, pues salir de esas exclusividades y conocer un poco más y en profundidad cuáles eran las razones que habían detrás, ¿no? Estábamos todos muy familiarizados con mucha literatura, pero bueno, pues queríamos escuchar en este caso de los protagonistas. Queríamos conocer por parte de las oficinas de transferencia de tecnología cuáles eran los principales problemas que encontraban a la hora de transferir de una manera mucho más amplia, de transferir en términos de no exclusividad, qué había detrás de todo eso. Esa fue nuestra pregunta de investigación. Que acordamos, pues sí que trabajamos conjuntamente con Jai y empezamos pues todo un proceso, ¿no? de identificación, pues estableciendo un perímetro metodológico, un análisis cualitativo, una identificación de códigos deductivos, inductivos, etcétera, para conocer un poco más esas narrativas y saber qué había detrás de todo eso. El resultado, bueno, pues de alguna manera se confirmaba en gran medida lo que encontrábamos en la literatura, pero sí que es cierto que algunos aspectos pues, nos parecieron bastante interesantes, ¿no? Pues, por ejemplo, con respecto a las propias estrategias de licencia, pues una de las, yo creo, de las respuestas más frecuentes es que había que pensar el caso por caso, ¿no? Pero el caso por caso, en el caso de la innovación biomédica, siempre nos llevaba a lo mismo, que es a la licencia exclusiva. Con lo cual, pues bueno, pues ahí el asunto del caso por caso pues se quedaba un poco sin contestar, ¿no? Y era sin embargo, era enormemente recurrente. Por otra parte, también nos trasladaban los profesionales de la transferencia de tecnología que de alguna manera pues había que tener en cuenta otros elementos, ¿no? Como era la madurez o como son las incertidumbres que manejan que se maneja con respecto a determinados productos para conocer un poco mejor en qué términos se podía transferir o no en términos de exclusividad, ¿no? Por otra parte, los propios financiadores, ¿no? Que es verdad que, bueno, pues tampoco se favorecía, ¿no? Y con esa financiación pues se pudiera transferir en términos de no exclusividad de toda la producción biomédica. Y luego, pues por otra parte, pues tienes que tener un apoyo institucional, en este caso por parte de la institución que está detrás de ti, pues todo un equipo que también apoye esa política de transferencia de no exclusividad y luego, pues bueno, pues elementos para poder manejarla. La variedad, en este caso, de socios que puedes tener pues, cuando a lo mejor transfieres a cuatro o cinco entidades diferentes. Estos elementos nos parecieron, la verdad, que bastante interesantes. También nos contaban, ¿no? Y es otro de los resultados que refleja el estudio es que, bueno, al final las estrategias de transferencia de tecnología respondían al producto, pero también respondían a las propias dinámicas de mercado, ¿no? Y eso pues también es otro elemento que por parte de ellos era muy importante tener en cuenta, y ellos mismos, pues desde las propias oficinas de transferencia de tecnología, pues tienen que rendir también sus resultados, tienen que alcanzar sus objetivos, ¿no? Y a veces pues las negociaciones de licencias exclusivas pues pueden ser, o de licencias no exclusivas, pueden ser más complicadas, pueden ser más largas, pueden ser más complejas, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues digamos un poco que he dado pinceladas generales de resultados del proyecto, pero bueno, sí que es verdad que al final un poco lo que nos permitió fue, si me permitís decirlo, darnos de bruces con una realidad, ¿no? Es decir, conocer un poco pues, lo que hay detrás, o al menos la percepción y un poco la realidad que viven otros, en este caso, pues las personas que están más implicadas en el día a día de la transferencia de tecnología, especialmente la biomédica, ¿no? Entonces, pues bueno, en muchos casos fue la verdad que bastante revelador, ¿no? Y nos ayudó mucho a entender muchos contextos, pero bueno, también pone encima de la mesa pues elementos que quizás a lo mejor pues se tienen que tener en cuenta para revisar y para ver de qué manera pues podemos incorporar la transferencia de tecnología, quizás a lo mejor que salga de este ámbito más técnico y se incorpore al espacio más político. Yo creo que eso siempre es importante, dar ese punch político, y luego pues aprovechar también de alguna manera esa ventana de oportunidad que abrió la COVID, donde pues bueno, pues la incorporación bueno, pues de determinadas iniciativas, pues como SITAP, o condicionalidades en financiación, pues como vimos en Europa con respecto a Horizonte 2020, pues que de alguna manera eso sirviera para incorporarlo un poco más a la política en sí, ya no puntual de un contexto de crisis sanitaria, de salud pública, sino de una manera más permanente, ¿no? Entonces, pues bueno, yo creo que por esa parte sí que percibimos una recepción muy positiva a todas estas cosas, pero también la necesidad de abrir un debate, ¿no? Y que permeara también por otros espacios al que todavía quizás a lo mejor no había llegado. Para nosotros este ejercicio que hicimos en Salud por Derecho con Jai, de alguna manera es una continuidad de un gran esfuerzo que venimos haciendo desde hace mucho tiempo, y es de intentar ver cómo se pueden fomentar modelos alternativos a la patente, modelos alternativos a una propiedad intelectual que reduce el acceso y que todos y todas las que estamos aquí conocemos también. Y en el caso de España, de manera muy concreta, hemos disfrutado, y esperemos que disfrute. El problema es que ahora se está poniendo en peligro, y por eso nos parece tan importante sacar este tema ahora y aprovechar este espacio para que todo el mundo se haga eco del enorme riesgo que estamos teniendo ahora mismo en España y en Europa. Hay un instrumento que es la exención hospitalaria, y esa exención hospitalaria es lo que permite que las terapias avanzadas y toda la medicina personalizada en genómica, es decir, gran parte de la medicina del futuro, esa medicina se pueda desarrollar en espacios públicos, en este caso bajo la supervisión de un facultativo, de manera no rutinaria y siguiendo unos procesos tan absolutamente escrupulosos como los que sigue la industria. Esto en España ha dado unos resultados excepcionales. Tenemos ahora mismo productos desarrollados en hospitales por los profesionales sanitarios que trabajan en la red de hospitales públicos que están tratando tumores hematológicos, que en el caso de uno de ellos, de uno de los medicamentos, ya ha llegado a más de 300 personas. No hay alternativa a los pacientes, porque no la hay, pero sin embargo, los médicos en este caso y los investigadores abren un espacio de innovación académico con una financiación pública que a la industria no le gusta. No le gusta nada. Habla de competencia desleal. Habla de que en este caso hay posibilidades de que, claro, para ellos el innovar sea menos incentivador, menos motivador. Eso ahora mismo está en discusión en Europa. Han aprovechado el espacio de la reforma del paquete farmacéutico para intentar, en la medida de lo posible, limitar tanto el uso de este instrumento que prácticamente sea inútil el poder utilizarlo.
Irene, perdona, te queda un
Sí,
minuto, tienes que ir cerrando.
perfecto, acabo ya. Con esto lo que quiero trasladaros es que hay instrumentos ahora mismo en el mercado y en la legislación, en el caso de Europa, que pueden hacer posible esta realidad de transferir tecnología donde la propiedad intelectual no es un problema y que está salvando vidas y los estamos poniendo en riesgo. Y bueno, simplemente sumar este punto a la discusión que nos parece muy pertinente y a la orden para responder cualquier tipo de preguntas. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, Irene. Thank you very much. Very interesting. I invite everyone interested to more details to read the report that Salud por Derecho and HI have prepared, and also the additional report on the hospital exception that Salud por Derecho has published that I think is really worth to read in detail. I wanted to just highlight one aspect that Irene has mentioned regarding the interesting conversations with the Technology Transfer Office, in which they even if they have an interest to do non-exclusive license, the aspect of dealing on the amount of work that implied doing non-exclusive license to more than one company that requires an amount of time and dedication and expertise that they might not be always prepared for, even if they have the will. I have personally seen that challenge when working with CITAB, with some of the licenses, and even with the Spanish Research Council was interested in such a model, struggled to actually in the real implementation with licensee. So it will be interesting to hear also the NDI experience on that and how the Universidad de Chile sees that point, because I guess that might be a future challenge when we have, and the organizations may have the willingness to do non-exclusive licensing. So now, thank you, Irene. Let's turn to Jaume. Jaume Vidal, who is a senior policy advisor of Health Action International, and he will also be discussing and presenting a report, the findings of this, the report Public Return on Public Investment, and how the recommendations of that report are relevant in the context of the current discussions of the pharma new legislation at EU level. So Jaume, it's your time to present, and I think you will be using slides we can already see. Jaume, your time.
Jaume, I think you're on mute.
I was just like testing you if you were really listening. So you are, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to start. I think that after Irene's presentation, I think it's really interesting. This really like when advocacy meets real life. I think it's very interesting. And I think that that's really what we are going to be doing here today. So I want to start a little bit with the background. I mean, as Irene has said, we have also been working on the issue of how to improve and enhance like public funded innovation for some time. It's really a discussion that has been going on in public health circles for at least a decade. And I think it's a response to like two evidence. First, that the current biomedical R&D is a profit-driven model, and also that public involvement is so far the best guarantee that there is a promotion and protection, or at least acknowledgement of public interest. I think that the COVID pandemic just confirmed many things, but one among them was that, government-funded innovations were taken over by industry and then brought to market without insufficient safeguards or access clauses. That was very clear with some of the vaccines developed in the US and Germany. Also, I mean, and going back to that report that we did like jointly with Salud por Derecho, and that was like, for me, was really like an eye-opener in the sense that public research institutions, well, like the access goals was not always like shared by all the actors. in the chain, especially with tech transfer offices. There was like a sort of disconnect. And also like the fact that there is like an imbalance in the sense that you see that all the attempts that have been tried in like instances like CEPI, for instance, also with EU-funded research programs, really like the idea of really let's have enforceable clauses, because that's the issue. I mean, I think it's really the key, like to have it like that it's enforceable and it's binding. They have fallen short. I mean, there has like plenty of good intentions, but at the end, when you have like the final product, there's always something has happened that the price has nothing to do with like what we are saying here, like this guarantee of public return. So the issue here, there are like three factors that we have identified, like structural factors, that it's transparency, accountability, and enforceability. And like the new report, like the follow-up to the licensing report, we are really proud of this report, especially in a sense that it's a little bit like a grown-up report, in the sense that you realize at certain age that there are some things that are given, others that you can change, and others that will be changed by people who come behind you. And I think it's very important to have this long-term like perspective on policy matters, because we have really a reality in the sense that even though there's like widespread public support for really like make public R&D like accessible and really force companies to share knowledge, it's a hard political sell. It's really difficult. And even though now you can see in the European Union, like after the pandemic, there's like a change in attitude, there's a change and clearly there's a new acknowledgement about the need to really ensure public return. It's still difficult to get it done. And we have seen many attempts. We have seen experiences that are really good at the patent pool, at CTAP, at CEPI after some hesitations, but it's difficult to find really a successful process that really, there's always something. Sometimes it's the delay, others it's like that it's only one single product, the others is like the exception on the geographical scope of licenses. But you see, we have to be positive, and there are plenty of opportunities ahead of us. For us, there's really like two really types of opportunity. One, it's all discussions on the pandemic preparedness and response. It's very interesting to see how the pandemic accord discussions are advancing. Well, it's rather crawling, but it's really interesting that we are seeing that technology transfer is at the core of the discussion. And it's interesting because it doesn't seem so. But once you really look at the text from the bureau and you follow more or less the discussions, it's tech transfer. It's not IP. It's really like tech transfer. It's access to publicly generated technology. So it's really interesting. And also we have it on the AHR amendments, the International Health Regulations amendments. There's also this discussion in the sense that it's clear that in the next global health architecture, like technology transfer and public funded technology is going to be part of the issues that is being addressed. Also, I mentioned the renewed mandates at the MPP and also at CEPI. And also I had forgotten like the recent announcement at WHO that CTAP is going to now be like widening scope to all health technologies. And also we are now already working on the framework program 10 at the European Union, that it's going to be the successor of Horizon Europe, that was the successor of Horizon 2020, and now we have this also HERA, that it's also one of the major like programs of public support for R&D. But we have also challenges, and challenges from our perspective in civil society, it's galvanized support. We have to work with more people, with more sectors. We have to really work with researchers. We need to talk with them. We need to talk their language. We need to talk with funders. We need to talk with governments. And also, we need to talk with industry. I think that the NDI is showing that you can not only talk, you can work and get results with industry. And that's interesting. And finally, and I insist a lot on this, like pleas and commitments are nice, but make them operational, make them enforceable. I mean, we have the head of the European Commission said vaccines are public goods at the beginning of the pandemic, and now it seems like a joke. So the issue is like, okay, if you believe that vaccines can be public goods, okay, please take steps, really show political will to make it happen. And finally, our recommendations, very clear. I think that, again, this kind of disconnect between technology transfer offices and other like components in the access and licensing policies, this disconnect has to be bridged. It's important that there's like a greater coordination. We believe that industry has a role to play, and in the sense that, and again, it's not because Rachel is here, but again, the NDI is showing the way on how to do this, in the sense how to ensure that you still can dictate access terms later in the stage. How can you protect IP? Maybe because maybe you need like a defensive patenting, or maybe there's like other forms of IP protection that doesn't include market exclusivities. And governments, I think it's really interesting to have Gaspar here and the experience of the University of Chile, because we are seeing, I mean, clearly, I mean, there's like a willingness by some governments to step up. I mean, it's the case of the Spanish government, it's the case of Chilean public institutions. And I think that this goes coupled with also this reinforced public leadership in R&D, in the sense to say, yes, the public like system has a role to play and has a role to play in the long term. We have to go beyond like the early research, that it's really where like public money really is spent right now. And I think that public interest civil society, as high as Salud por Derecho, we need to focus in our mission: educate, inform, and empower. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaume, for a very interesting presentation. And I think to extract some actually messages from your presentation on when we say we are lacking a little bit of the power, public leadership in R&D, that we see from some messages, as you mentioned at the beginning of the pandemic, but then there is really a lack of implementation on those political commitments. And I think that's why this conversation we're having today is so important, which can also help guide what the actions for the next year or the strategies of civil society and other organizations moving forward could be, if we want the non-exclusive licensing becoming a norm or more frequent between technology transfer offices of universities and public health institutions. And in order to help us understand better how to do that, and our next speaker is going to be Rachel Cohen, who is now Senior Advisor at the NDI and has been the Regional Director for North America for over a decade. And Rachel will be presenting the NDI licensing experience, which has been referenced a lot by Jaume. And also is going to be discussing how the implementation, on how this is relevant and important, and an opportunity as well, hopefully, in the discussion of the so-called pandemic treaty that is actually taking place nowadays in Geneva and elsewhere. So Rachel, thank you for joining us. It's your turn now.
Muchas gracias, Elena. Speaking in Spanish for just a moment, but then I will switch back. I have to turn off my translation. Muchas gracias a Jai y Salud por Derecho por invitarme a este webinar. Compartiré solo algunos breves comentarios sobre la experiencia de la DNDI como organización de en inglés, lo siento. Y luego vincularé esto con las negociaciones en curso en la OMS para un acuerdo contra la pandemia. Okay, I switched to English now. At DNDI, I think most of you know, the commitment to access starts at the conception phase of every research and development project, not once a product is in late stage clinical development, not once a product has received regulatory approval. In other words, access is not an afterthought. It's something we try to actually build into the R&D process itself as early as possible in order to have an end-to-end approach that guarantees equitable access at the end of the day. This means that from the design of our target product profiles, or TPPs, to the approach to intellectual property and licensing, to the selection of our industrial partners and manufacturing partners, to, in fact, our regulatory strategy, access is at the core of how we think about research and development. A critical piece of our approach is our intellectual property policy. I can put a link in the chat perhaps when I'm done, which is based on the principle, two kind of core principles. One, that we are aiming to ensure that drugs are affordable and accessible in an equitable manner, and that when DNDi conducts research and development, we are developing those drugs as public goods wherever possible. I think maybe here it's important to mention that this intellectual property policy at DNDi does make clear that we won't accept projects, generally speaking, in which intellectual property is obviously going to be an insurmountable barrier, but that doesn't mean that we don't engage with partners and try to negotiate the best possible and most favorable terms. So I just want to unpack a little bit what this means, both in the upstream side of what we do and in the downstream side of what we do. So as I mentioned, when we develop our target product profiles, we do this, of course, to respond to needs. We do this with local clinicians, with local regulators in affected communities. And one of the things that we do, which is not always done with TPPs, is to establish a target price based on the best available information right in the TPP itself. At least this can help us to negotiate a price ceiling with industrial partners. It's a core part of how we approach negotiations across the board. When we build scientific partnerships, we also, wherever possible, do this based on open science principles. A key learning here is that the earlier that DNDi is involved in the R&D process, the more leverage we have when we're negotiating agreements, contractual arrangements, licensing terms, and so forth. So we do have two separate types of agreements. We have research collaboration and license agreements. These are generally for the earlier stage projects. And then we also have development collaboration and license agreements. These are generally when we either in-license or are part of a project when a product is fairly well advanced in the pipeline. A lot of the details that I'll speak about were beautifully laid out by my colleagues in a recent paper, which I will also post in the chat. And you can look at the details there. But just to kind of summarize briefly, we tend to try to negotiate what we call gold standard licensing terms with the partners in order to ensure that we have the freedom to operate, that we have, to the extent possible, pro-access management of intellectual property. And we do this in order to ensure that we can enable follow-on research, that we can reduce research bottlenecks, that we can contribute to access to knowledge, to technology transfer, and ultimately to affordability and access. So generally speaking, what we aim for are perpetual, royalty-free, non-exclusive, sub-licensable licenses to DNDi in the contractually defined target diseases. We generally try also to negotiate worldwide research and manufacturing rights, commitments to the final product being available at cost plus a minimal margin, which we define. Again, we are very committed to the principle of non-exclusivity, because this is the key to enabling technology transfer and also local production or regional manufacturing to multiple sources of production. Obviously, also this can contribute to decreasing the price of the product. On the downstream side, we have to make sure that we choose our partners based on mission alignment. We try to ensure that everything we do guarantees sustainable production and supply at an affordable price. We utilize and also test adapted regulatory approaches that reduce barriers to access, like the Article 58 in Europe, and support other downstream efforts around adoption and delivery. And it's because of this firsthand experience that, that we are advocating for governments, actually, to enact similar types of commitments in their contractual agreements, and particularly here, funding agreements. And we think that these can and should be included in the WHO pandemic accord. This is, from our standpoint, the clearest and most direct way to ensure a public return on public, and by the way, maybe also philanthropic investments in research and development. We often have very little leverage as a small nonprofit R&D organization, but governments have a tremendous amount of leverage. They have leverage as the primary funders of biomedical R&D. And we all know, and Jaume just laid out, that R&D is a process that often involves multiple handoffs between different actors, public research institutions, academic institutions, the private sector, and so on. So if governments were to systematically include conditions on public funding, this would ensure that all those different players understand what the rules are and that they abide by those rules. And the conditions could include commitments to affordability, commitments to specific licensing strategies that will encourage open innovation. It will also ensure kind of knowledge and data sharing and an intellectual property approach that will enable such sharing, as well as technology transfer, and maybe even at the funding level, requirements for distributed manufacturing to ensure supply stability or supply autonomy in certain regions. Unfortunately, and I'm getting to the end here, and despite clear support from a number of countries, from both the global north and the global south, a provision that was in the zero draft of the pandemic accord that would have actually done just this was removed in subsequent drafts. We don't know all the details, but one reason was apparently concerns that such conditions could disincentivize innovation. And honestly, we believe this concern is overstated. If these provisions were enacted, they could actually boost the kind of innovation that governments actually want, that is more needs-oriented, that is more public health-oriented, and also provide clarity among all the different R&D actors about what the expectations are in advance. In our view, a failure to even start to negotiate these provisions in the pandemic accord would remove really one of the very few options we have to operationalize all this talk about equity in these international negotiations. So we hope certainly that in the next round of those negotiations, this particular clause will be reinstated, and that governments will take seriously the power they actually have to shape the direction of research so that it responds to needs, shape the research process itself so that knowledge is shared as widely as possible, and ensure that all of this innovation is geared towards equitable access at the end of the day.
Thank you, Rachel. Very interesting. I would like to keep optimistic that these changes are still possible in this very important round of negotiation of the pandemic accord that is about to happen in December. Also, I think it's interesting what you started with mentioning the needs to consider the access clauses at the beginning when during the R&D phases, something that the NDI does, and we have more and more proof that is actually crucial for negotiation. And the more involvement you have and the earlier you get involved in the phases, the more powerful negotiation you have. So it will be interesting now to hear from Gaspar from the Universidad de Chile. Is actually that's the case when they discuss access at the university, or if not, and what is the translation of that. So let me now give the floor to Gaspar Morgado, who is the Deputy Director of Technology Innovation at the Universidad de Chile, and he has participated in several licenses deals across Latin America, Europe, and the US. And more recently, he has been licensing and very heavily involved in the licensing of an antibody COVID test to the COVID Technology Access Pool. And it will be interesting to hear a lot from him now on the details of that agreement and in which phase they are at the moment. So, yeah, Gaspar, deseando escucharte, tu turno.
Many thanks to everyone. I'm pretty delighted to be here. I will share my screen right now. Can you see it in a full screen? Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, we do.
So basically, most of you don't know about our university. We are one of the most renowned universities in Latin America. And believe it or not, we have pretty strong ties with the industry. And so regarding tech transfer, we have a licensing income per year of about $1 million on royalties. And this is quite high if you consider the amount that we invest per year on R&D. And our office, our tech transfer office is quite new. I have been running the office over the last 5 years, and with the focus on the internationalization of the use of our own technologies. And as you can see, we have a vast experience in licensing biomedical technologies abroad. You can see several well-known companies here, and also the WHO organization, where we submitted this neutralizing antibody detection technology for the CTAP. Here, as you might be aware, Chile is one of the countries with the largest number of free trade agreements in force. And we have plenty of double taxation, agreements to avoid the double taxation across the countries. So meaning that we could export many things, including technologies. And this is an advantage for us. And actually, I will say that roughly we have licensed technologies across 20 countries, including Asia, Africa, Europe, and US, North America, sorry. So we have this slogan of having local technologies of global impact. And our main KPI is basically the number of technologies that are being used by the industry and society. So this is a strategy of having, how to say this, this is like kind of anti-shelving of the knowledge. So we don't want this to be stored. We don't want that the technologies, the R&D results, and so on, the innovation are stored in our laboratories. We believe that this is far more interesting having on the society, on the industry, and that's why we have, I would say, we are very independent on deciding whether we provide an exclusive or non-exclusive license. And also, I have to point out that we try to not patent biomedical technologies in Chile or in low and middle income countries because either we don't have the infrastructure to exploit them or manufacture it, and as well as to not have this, how to say, to not engage on any problems with the society because we have an exclusive license agreement, and then the affordability of the treatment is not so accessible. So the price of the medicament is quite high, and so on and so on. So and I don't know if someone already said this, but in Latin America, we have a strong generic industry, I mean, in the pharma industry. So we are competing against the innovative industry. And I will say that in some cases, the drugs are quite affordable. I'm not saying all the cases, but in most of them. But anyway, we have experienced the same problems of affordability, access to some of the drugs, patents problems, and so on and so on. And regarding what we have done with the CTAP, despite that this is a 2-year timeline, the process is quite straightforward. So all of this started on August 21st, 2021, when we attended to a CTAP working group, and we realized that we have some technologies that might be submitted to this to the CTAP because of several reasons. We wanted to offer a solution for pandemic or emergency use. In our case in Chile, the University of Chile carry out all the analytics, all the IT infrastructure to monitor the COVID cases in a real-time manner. But also we carry out the PCR test. We provided our university our university hospital in order to only accept patients having COVID symptoms. And also we deploy all the laboratories of the School of Medicine, or most of them that had PCR or ELISA capabilities in order to test the population in Chile. As well as the School of Engineering also deployed all the IT and infrastructure to monitor the cases. So let's say we provide some public goods to the country and also to other territories. And in this case, it was neutralizing antibody detection method. We submitted the technical information as this was pretty standard. The CTAP has a specific format. So in order to provide all the information, and what was very important at this step is that we had compiled all the analytical and clinical validation and experimental data beforehand. So we provide all of this, and then you have the WHO and the MPP technical bodies, and both of them had to review all the data and carry out also the analysis of non-infringement. This was, I would say this is obvious, but if you are in a, how to say, in an emergency, you probably will try to jump across some steps. But in this case, it didn't happen. We also carry out a freedom to operate analysis, at least internally, in order to double check that we are not infringing some third parties' rights. And then after that, all of this period of the review of the technical data, the analytical data, the clinical validation data, we move into the steps of negotiating the terms. Here, we are a public university. We are not pursuing having some profit on this. We prefer to make the technology available to as many countries as possible. So the terms were pretty standard. And then...
Apologies, Gaspar, you need to conclude in a minute or so.
Yeah, I'm also finishing right now. So, and then the MPP and the WHO teams, they have to review the draft, and we signed it in July, I guess so. And then we carry out this joint press release on July, some few months ago. Now, the important step is seeking or prospecting the sub-licensees worldwide, these qualified manufacturers, in order that the technology could be deployed in all of these countries. Many thanks.
Thank you, Gaspar, for a very interesting presentation, and also understand a bit the thinking behind the university on how you take the decisions. I mean, if we have time during the question and answers, it would be good to hear a little bit more about that process of how to identify prospect licensees. Well, I think we have concluded here the presentations from all the panelists. Before we go to the questions from the audience, which we already have some of them in the chat. So I please invite you to keep adding questions there, or raise your hand if you want to do a question directly. But before that, I have been told Jaime from Salud por Derecho will have to add a couple of points to be part of the conversation. So I want to give him the floor quickly so he can intervene. Jaime.
Thank you very much, Elena.
You are muted, Jaime.
Yeah, I think now it's working. Thanks a lot, Elena. I'm going to switch to Spanish for translation purposes, so please click on the interpretation button. Muchas gracias por todas las exposiciones. Quería simplemente hacer un aporte sobre los temas que se han venido discutiendo y acerca de lo que salía en el chat sobre el artículo 58 y enmarcarlo esto dentro del contexto de la reforma de la legislación europea para saber la opinión también de las panelistas. Al final, lo que comentaba Rachel sobre cómo debemos, siguiendo un poco el planteamiento del DNDi, incorporar las condiciones de acceso lo más arriba de la corriente posible para condicionar que no puedan existir posiciones abusivas a la hora de acceder a los medicamentos. ¿Cómo en Europa y qué oportunidades existen ahora en Europa para ir más allá del artículo 58 de esta colaboración con la OMS y poder incorporar por diseño las condicionalidades, así como las políticas de transferencia que desarrollamos en el informe, tanto mi compañera Irene como yo, así como lo que Gaspar nos ha venido a contar, para que todas esas políticas estén por diseño. Por ejemplo, en una de las propuestas ahora mismo del Parlamento tenemos una facilidad de medicamentos europea, Europe Medicine Facility, que podría ser diseñado en sí mismo como un instrumento de salud global, no solamente centrado en enfermedades que tienen que ver con Europa, sino productos que estén en el portfolio de enfermedades atendidas de la pobreza de la OMS o en la lista, en el blueprint de la lista de enfermedades prioritarias de la OMS, para poder incentivar que el desarrollo en Europa esté encaminado de la I+D para allá, siempre unido a condiciones de acceso, como las semejantes a las que incorporan CARB-X en el diseño de los planes de acceso a la hora de desarrollar antibióticos, que eso exista por diseño en las propias legislaciones de países que acaban estableciendo normas internacionales y que acaban teniendo una incoherencia de políticas entre lo que proponen a diferentes niveles en plataformas internacionales versus a lo que proponen en propuestas regionales. ¿Cómo podemos utilizar estos procesos que están a día de hoy en marcha para avanzar en que las políticas regionales incorporen la salud global más allá de los tratados internacionales de los que hemos venido hablando? Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Jaime. Gracias por tu respuesta. I think we have, there were a couple of additional questions that in the chat. Jaime has been answering to some of those. Also, there was a question for Rachel that has been already addressed. Brooke has raised a point regarding what could be a very useful report from the WHO, from CTAP, with examples of licensing models that has been used. I think you're making a question that I'm not sure we can respond, because
I think it should be broadly known that WHO is sitting on this very important report that would be very useful to negotiators in the pandemic accord and elsewhere, in discussions with NIH in the United States, in discussions in Europe. And there's simply no excuse for a very complete and careful report with support of an expert committee, with people committing multiple hours to try to make sure that the report was as thorough reaching and accurate as possible, with recommendations for best practices. And to me, it's inconceivable that this report has not yet been released to the public so that we can use it. And so I know there are people associated with CTAP and WHO on this call. And so they should be held to account to tell us why this isn't out in the public space yet.
Definitely. I mean, I think point taken by those that have some or not. I mean, by others maybe to continue to raise this question that Brooke is making. So that report, as you say, could be very useful in the negotiations that are about to happen and that continue to happen, but getting a crucial stage regarding the pandemic accord over the next weeks. I think Adrian is also raising a question. Adrian, so maybe for everyone to read it, I mean, so I don't have to read from your message. There was a question to Rachel that maybe you want to raise yourself, if you can, Adrian. Otherwise, I'm happy to read the question, but probably more interesting for everyone to hear you directly.
Are you referring to my question?
And I am referring to, I think there's a question from Adrian that has not been answered.
Yeah, sorry, I was mixing up Ariana and Adrian. Sorry.
Sorry, it's Adrian. Yeah.
Adrian says his microphone is not available. Okay,
so Adrian, the question he was asking to Rachel is, considering that the increase in R&D and industrial capacity in many middle-income countries and low-middle-income countries, have you seen more willingness in engaging in non-exclusive licensing practices coming from these countries? And also, do you see or foresee different policy approaches from high-income countries and LMICs when it comes to tech transfer and licensing? Rachel, this was a question for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Part of what I'm suggesting is that, so maybe just to back up a little bit, I think that actually, as concerns Brooke's previous question, as well as several of the others, all of these issues, if they could be established as clear norms in a pandemic accord, then it's very simple what the process is for kind of national implementation and kind of transforming them into actual legislation, policy, and laws at the national level. And if there is this policy coherence between actors at the global level, at the regional level, and at the national level, we won't keep bumping up against, all the different practices across different sectors, across different countries, across different regions, and so forth. That is one of many reasons why the pandemic accord as a norm-setting exercise is so critical, right? In terms of the specific question, I mean, we have rarely struggled, I think, I hope I'm not overstating this, to secure non-exclusive licensing agreements with industrial partners and manufacturers that are based in low and middle income countries. Mind you, we are usually struggling to find one producer for the kinds of diseases and products that we work on, like African sleeping sickness or visceral leishmaniasis or Chagas disease. It's not a high volume area, right? It's not an area where any particular company is seeing potential kind of commercial interest. So we often have, ironically, the opposite problem, trying to find even a single supplier that's willing to do this on a sustainable basis. And that is one of the many challenges of working in neglected fields, where the need or the demand is fragmented, where the volumes are sometimes low, where there is no global fund or other predictable financing mechanism to secure procurement, no pooled procurement mechanisms established for those diseases, and so forth. But I think we have seen in general quite a lot of willingness across the board, to be honest with you, to engage in non-exclusive licensing. Do I think that that's improved or increased a bit given kind of how the policy conversation has moved? It's hard to say, but maybe. Maybe that's the case. It certainly, I think, is not something that is a deal breaker. Where it gets trickier is when we are starting at a very early stage and it's not clear what the utility of the compound could be. It's not clear if there could be a dual use. In other words, a use for very neglected diseases and potentially a more commercial use. And that's why building those conditions in as early as possible is so crucial.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I think you also raised a point regarding, and I think because we are not advancing enough on the conversation regarding establishing licensing, non-exclusive licensing terms, it doesn't allow us to keep going on the discussion on additional challenges, which is, as you say, maybe many cases for neglected diseases, or even non-neglected, but those diseases that don't have global procurement mechanisms address those challenges, like identifying manufacturers which it's not always as easy for diagnostics as well, or for other diseases. And those might require creative ideas as well that we are not addressed as a society either, because the conversation is stuck in the beginning phase still. So, well, I think we're out of time. We are already a little bit over the hour. Thank you everyone for joining and staying a little bit over. This has been a fascinating discussion, which I'm hoping we can continue, because unfortunately there is a lot more to discuss. As we're saying, the political discussion is not advancing as quickly as we would like. So I'm sure there is a lot more to keep discussing with technology offices across the globe. We have many of them here present today, and hopefully this is only the beginning of future conversations. Again, thank you to Salud por Derecho and Health Technology International for organizing this session and sharing your reports. Congratulations for those, and let's keep the work. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elena.
Gracias.
Bye bye. Gracias.
Bye.